She was on the road and was headed for home. She didn't dare look back as she traveled further and further away from the horrible place where she was held captive by her worst nightmare. At first, she didn't notice that she was going above the speed limit, but whenever she realized it, she slowed down. She hoped that her worst nightmare was still occupied, and she would have enough time to get as far away from him as possible before he discovered that she was missing. She just wanted the horrible experience to come to an end. As she drove on, she started to think about the young man who had set her free. She was thankful that he came along and rescued her, but at the same time, she was sorrowful. She regretted not trusting him when he truly was there to help her. Judging him harshly as she did was a mistake that she wished that she could have taken back. Unfortunately, there was nothing that could be done. She was miles away from him, and he made it clear that he did not want her to come back. As she continued to think about him and the things that he said, her concern for him grew. A huge part of her wanted to go back for him, even though he refused to go with her. Furthermore, he didn't even want her to look back as she left the horrible place behind. She wanted to forget about him and the entire situation, but she just couldn't. She feared the possibility of something terrible happening to him. She continued to think about the things that he told her, and she thought about when he told her that he couldn't let the horrible man know that he was close by and that he wanted to remain hidden. It caused her to fear for his safety even more. What if the horrible man spotted him? What if he found out that it was the young man who set her free? What would he do to him? At that moment, she pulled her car over. She wasn't sure what to do at that moment. She was finally free, with no sign of her worst nightmare in sight. She knew that if she went back, she would put herself at risk of being pursued and possibly captured again. But at the same time, she feared that the young man would truly be in danger if he was discovered by his father. She wasn't sure if she could live with the thought of something bad happening to him. She glanced at the rearview mirror to see if there was anything coming from behind. There was nothing. She then sighed before she put her car in drive. She glanced in the rearview mirror before she continued her journey as she headed further away from her prison and closer to home. She continued on her journey as she headed to her home. As she drove, she tried to forget about the young man, but she couldn't. The further she traveled, the more she thought about him. At that point, she knew that she had to do the right thing, and what she felt was right was turning around and going back, even though he told her not to. She knew that she would not be able to live with herself if something happened to him, and she did nothing to stop it. With that, she found a place to turn around, and then she headed back to where the young man was last seen. She didn't particularly like the idea of going back, especially knowing that she was putting herself at risk of being captured by her worst nightmare. At the very least, she wanted to know for certain that the young man was all right and no harm had come to him. As she drove on, she thought about the disguise that he had worn to keep his identity hidden. The thought of it gave her an idea that she hoped would keep her from getting caught. When she arrived in the nearest town, she made a stop at a shop where she picked up several things that she would use to disguise herself. After purchasing what she needed, she stopped somewhere to change into her disguise. Then she continued her quest to find the young man so she could make sure that he was all right. Before she left the town where she had stopped, she decided to make one more stop to refuel her car. She wanted to make sure she was prepared to continue her journey, and she didn't want to make any more stops after that unless she absolutely had to. She came to a filling station and she pulled her car in at one of the pumps, and then she got out of the car. At that very moment, she experienced a feeling like she was being watched. As she glanced around, she spotted the person who was observing her closely. It was him, the young man, and she could tell that he knew that something was going on. He glanced around before he made his way over to where she was. At first he didn't say anything as he studied her face. She wasn't sure whether she should say anything. The young man grabbed the nozzle and started to refuel the car. "I know who you are," the young man said. She gasped as she looked into his eyes. "What are you doing here?" the young man asked. "I'm refueling my car," she said. "No, you know what I mean. Why are you here?" the young man asked. "Isn't it obvious?" she said. "I know that you turned back. I want to know why," the young man said. "I was coming back for you." "I wasn't expecting to see you here," she said. "Why?" the young man asked. "Because I was worried about you," she said. "But I told you to never come back. Did I not?" the young man said. "Yes, you did," she said. "Why didn't you listen to me?" the young man asked. "I couldn't just leave you," she said. "I told you not to worry about me," the young man said. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't do what you told me to do," she said. "You made a mistake by coming back here," the young man said. "But I'm not even at the place where I had last seen you. Neither of us are. We're miles away from that place, which makes me wonder what it is that you're doing," she said. The young man sighed before he responded. "I was looking for you," he said. "Why?" she asked. The young man said nothing as he removed the nozzle. "Why won't you answer me?" she asked. "Because I just realized that we've just wasted time by refueling your car," the young man said. "What do you mean?" "My car needed fuel," she said. "But you don't understand. You're going to have to leave your car behind." The young man said. "What? Why would I do that?" she asked. "Because he's looking for you. That's the reason that I'm here. I was hoping to find you before he did." The young man said. "What?" she said. "It's true, and he knows your car. The moment he spots it, he'll follow you, and he won't stop. This is why I told you to never come back. Unfortunately, I get the feeling that he will not let you go. He will pursue you, just as he did before." The young man said. "So, now what?" she asked. "We must leave this place. I'll pay for your fuel, but you're going to have to leave your car behind. We must stick together, and we have to go to where he will not find us." The young man said. "We could go to my home," she said. "Does he know where you live?" the young man asked. "No, I don't think so," she said. "Are you sure?" the young man asked. She said nothing to him as she looked at him nervously. "You have to be sure. If he knows where you live, he will come to your house," the young man said. "No," she said. "We may have to go somewhere else," the young man said. "What about my brother? Maybe he could help us," she said. "Do you really want to get him involved? Doing so would most likely put him in danger, and I wouldn't advise it. The less who are involved, the better," the young man said. "It was just a suggestion," she said. "I realize that, but I suggest that no one else gets involved. I don't want to risk putting anyone else in danger. If what I've been hearing is true, and I suspect that it is, otherwise we wouldn't be in this situation, then the best thing for your brother would be to keep him out of this, because my father would have no qualms about murdering him if he felt he was getting in the way. Any more, I'd have to wonder whether he would kill me in order to get to you," the young man said. "Would he?" she asked. "I'm not certain. That's the reason I want to do everything in my power to keep you safe. And I don't want anyone else to get mixed up in this. I have to put a stop to whatever it is he's been doing," the young man said. After paying for the fuel and getting some coffee, she and the young man were about to leave the filling station together. She decided to leave her car behind, just as he told her to, even though she wasn't altogether thrilled with the idea of leaving it at the filling station. The two of them got into the young man's car, and she glanced at the young man who put the key into the ignition and started the car. She could see that something wasn't quite right about the young man, and she was left with feelings of concern. "Are you sure you'll be okay to drive?" she asked. "Yes. Why do you ask?" the young man said. "Because it seems like you're not feeling well," she said. "I'll be fine," the young man said. He then put the car in drive, and the two of them left the filling station. "We still need to figure out where we should go," the young man said. "We could go to my house," she said. "Are you sure it's a good idea?" the young man asked. "Why not? It was where I was heading, that is, before I decided to turn back," she said. "I realize that, but as I told you, he's looking for you. It wouldn't be advisable unless you know for certain that he doesn't know where you live," the young man said. "How would he know where I live?" she asked. "Has he taken anything that belongs to you, or has he seen anything with your address on it?" the young man asked. "I don't think so," she said. But you're not sure, the young man said. She didn't respond. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that he was the reason that your car wouldn't start while at the inn. What about the fact that he managed to capture you? With that being said, he could have looked through your belongings. Just because there's nothing missing, it doesn't mean he didn't see something that would have had your address on it. He could have written it down, the young man said. You're right. That could have happened. We probably shouldn't go to my house. Where should we go? She said. At the moment, I'm not certain. What I do know is that we cannot waste time. As of now, my main mission is to get you away from him and make sure you remain safe, the young man said. What about you? You'll be miles away from where you live, she said. I can promise you that he's not home, nor is he at the pizzeria. He is out looking for you, and he will not stop until he finds you. That's why it's imperative that we're careful. There is no second guessing. Doing so could be critical, and one slip-up could put us both in danger, the young man said. Why can't we just have him arrested? She asked. Because as of now we have no proof, the young man said. This is terrible. I was hoping that this nightmare would be over. Maybe we should go to my house and I could contact my brother so he can help us, she said. Out of the question. I don't want to get anyone else involved, the young man said. But we can't continually be on the run, she said. No, but for now, I have to make sure that he doesn't find you. As of now, he still doesn't know where I am, nor does he know that I was the one who set you free. I made sure he would never find out. Not only did I set the alarm, but before that, I also disabled the security cameras, so he would never see what happened. I was extremely careful and made sure I wasn't seen, because I can tell you right now that he did check the footage to see what happened, or at least he tried to. Thankfully, he'll never know what happened. Setting the alarm was a diversion that took him away from you, so I would have a chance to help you, the young man said. But wouldn't the cameras detect you before they were disabled? She asked. No, because I kept my face hidden. I also wore gloves, so no fingerprints would be left, the young man said. Wow, you really thought of everything, didn't you? She said. As I told you, there is no room for slip-ups. One wrong move could cost us, the young man said. Well, in that case, I suppose I should leave everything up to you since you seem to know what you're doing. I'm trusting you to keep me safe, she said. I will do everything in my power to make sure you remain free from him. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he never takes you again, the young man said. The young man continued on his quest to get her to safety, and he drove on for several hours. He refused to stop unless it was absolutely necessary. As they traveled further, she became more and more concerned for him. She could see that he wasn't feeling well, and as time went on, he seemed to be feeling worse and worse. Are you sure? We shouldn't stop, she said. The young man said nothing as he kept his focus on the road. It was obvious that he had no intention of stopping, at least not for a while. He continued to travel for the entire day. It wasn't until late the following night when he decided to make a stop. What are you doing? Why are we stopping here? She asked. Because I arranged for us to stay here. It'll be all right. I know what I am doing. We should be fine, at least for now, the young man said. He parked the car where it would be hidden. Then he wasted no time as he got out of the car. Then she got out of the car, and the two of them made their way to a small cabin. He took the key and unlocked the door before the two of them went inside. Seeing that his face was flushed, she approached him, and then she gently touched the side of his face before she touched his forehead. You're burning up, she said. "I'll be all right," the young man said. She took hold of his hand, and then she took him to one of the rooms. He said nothing to her as he looked at her for a moment, and then he sat down on the bed. She left the room to get him a drink of water. Then she left the room again. She came back shortly afterward with a cool washcloth. When she approached the bed where the young man was, she sat down, and then she put the washcloth on his forehead. "I'm worried about you. Maybe we should get help," she said. "No," the young man said. "Why not?" she asked. "Because if you do that, there's a good chance of him finding both of us," the young man said. "But you're not well," she said. "I'll be all right. I think you should try to get some rest," the young man said. She took hold of his hand as she looked into his eyes with an expression of concern on her face. "Please, don't worry. I'll be all right," the young man said. "I'm so sorry for giving you such a difficult time. I just want you to get better," she said. "I'll be fine. I think that we both need some rest," the young man said. "Do you need anything?" she asked. The young man said nothing as he started to doze off. She sighed as she looked at him for a moment. Then, she left the room and went into another room to try to get some rest. Even though it was late in the night, she found it difficult to rest. All she could think about was the young man, and she worried about whether he was all right. She quietly left the bedroom and went into the room where he was because she wanted to see how he was doing. When she approached the bed, she looked at him for a moment as he slept. She was hesitant at first for the fear of waking him, but then she gently touched the side of his face and his forehead. He was still feverish, so she took another washcloth and ran it under some cold water, and then she took it into the room and put it on the young man's forehead. Then she quietly left the room. She went back into the room where she was staying and sat down on the bed. It wasn't long after that when she noticed the young man standing at the doorway of the room. "What are you doing?" he asked. She didn't respond. "Why aren't you asleep? Are you trying to run away again?" the young man asked. "No," she said. "Then why are you still awake?" the young man asked. "Because I can't sleep," she said. "Why not?" the young man asked. "I'm worried about you," she said. Before he had a chance to say anything, she continued to speak. "Maybe it would help if you were here with me," she said. "What do you mean? I am here with you," the young man said. "No, I mean with me, as in you in the room with me," she said. The young man said nothing as he looked at her nervously. "If you were with me, at least I would know if you're all right," she said. "I'm not so sure if it's such a good idea," the young man said. Then he sighed before he entered the room. She could see that he was nervous. When he approached the bed, he stood there for a moment with a nervous expression on his face. Then he sat down beside her. She reached up and touched the side of his face as she looked into his eyes. She sat up, and then she took him in her arms. She could feel the rapid beating of his heart as he rested against her. He let out another sigh as she gently touched the side of his face. As time went on, he became calmer, and eventually, he drifted off to sleep. She looked at his face, and then she smiled. Suddenly, she felt butterflies in her stomach as she continued to look at his face. Then she kissed his forehead, before she sighed as she hugged him. It wasn't much longer after that when she also fell asleep with him resting in her arms. The following morning, the young man seemed to be feeling better. He didn't seem to have anything to say when he woke up. He quietly left the room and it wasn't long after that when she also came out of the room. The young man remained silent as he glanced at her. She sighed as she glanced at him, and she was about to leave the room when the young man broke the silence. "You know, I have yet to figure you out," the young man said. She turned and looked at the young man who took a few steps toward her. "I thought that you were terrified of me," the young man said. She didn't respond. "Isn't that what you said? Yet last night you wanted me to spend the night in the room with you," the young man said. "No, your father is the scary one. As for me wanting you to be in the room with me, I just wanted to make sure you were all right," she said. "Have you forgotten that I look just like him? You said so yourself," the young man said. "But there's something different about you. You're not scary like him," she said. "I'm not sure if I like where this is going," the young man said. "I'm just trying to say that I'm not afraid of you. I'm willing to trust you," she said. "Right," the young man said. As she studied his face, she felt butterflies in her stomach. He, on the other hand, seemed bewildered as he looked at her. "I'm glad that you're feeling better," she said. "I told you that I'd be all right," the young man said. "So, now what should we do?" she asked. "For now, we should stay here. At some point, we're going to have to find some things to eat. We'll have to be careful. I'd like to think that he wouldn't find us here, but we can't be too careful," the young man said. "How do you plan to stop him?" she asked. "I haven't figured that out yet. I suppose I could try to figure that out while we're here," the young man said. "I'm sure you'll figure it out, but what will you do after you stop him and undo what he's done?" she asked. "Firstly, I have to find out whether the things I heard were in fact true. Judging by the current situation that we're in, I get a bad feeling that they are true. As for what I'll do afterward, I haven't really thought about it, since I don't really know how long it will take to fix the mess that he might have created," the young man said. "Oh," she said. "Are you all right?" the young man asked. "I suppose. Do you think I'll ever be able to go home?" she asked. "I'm not certain," the young man said. "I wish you could be there with me," she said. "What?" the young man said. "I mean," she said, "as I told you before, I don't know when or if you'll be able to go back there. There's a good chance of him knowing your address," the young man said. "Right. When this is all over, do you think we'll ever see each other again?" she asked. The young man didn't respond. "I was really hoping that we would," she said. "Why?" the young man asked. She didn't respond. "You don't want to live the kind of life that I live, and I wouldn't want to put you or anyone else through this. If what I fear is happening is in fact happening, then I suggest that you please don't waste your time on me," the young man said. He was about to walk away. "I can't help how I feel," she said. He stopped, and then he just stood there quietly for a moment before he turned and looked at her. "I never meant for it to happen, but I think that I'm falling in love with you," she said. "We barely know each other. We haven't even spent much time together," the young man said. "I realize that, but I've never felt this way before," she said. "Please don't do this," the young man said. "Ever since the day you set me free, I couldn't stop thinking about you. At first, I thought it was only because I was worried about you, but now I realize that it wasn't just because of that. I want to be wherever you go. I want you to be with me. If I ever go home, I want you to be there with me. If we have to go somewhere else, I don't care, as long as I'm with you," she said. "I'm telling you that no good will come of it. There is no future in it for either of us, and I can guarantee that one of us would end up alone with a broken heart," the young man said. "How do you know that?" she asked. "Because he'll never leave it alone. He'll do everything possible to destroy it," the young man said. "Destroy what?" she asked. Anything that could be between us, the young man said. Why? She asked. He'll do anything and everything to make me miserable. He always has, and that will never change. The young man said. What has he done to you? She asked. I don't even know where to begin, and I'm not sure if I'm comfortable enough talking about it. You have no idea how painful it is for me, knowing that I will never be able to live a normal life. Ever. Also, I'm no good for you. I'm not what you think I am, so I think that it's best if you just forget about me, the young man said. He then left the room and went to the bedroom to be alone. Since it was obvious that the young man wanted to be left alone, she decided to go out to search for food. She quietly went outside and walked away from the cabin where the two of them had been staying. She managed to find some berries that weren't far from the cabin, and she started picking them. After she had finished picking the berries, she went back to the cabin. Just as she opened the door, she saw the young man standing there with his arms crossed and with an angry expression on his face. Why? He asked. I was just picking these berries, she said. Get inside, the young man said. She looked at him nervously as she stepped inside, and then he closed the door behind them. I was just heading out to look for you. I figured that you decided to leave again, the young man said. No, of course not, she said. Why would you go out there? The idea is to not get caught, and there you are going outside in broad daylight, the young man said. She didn't respond. Why would you do that? Are you trying to get us caught? The young man asked. No, course not, she said. You could have at least told me that you were planning to do that. I would have come out with you, the young man said. I figured that you didn't want to be bothered. Please don't be mad at me, she said. I was worried about you, the young man said. I'm sorry, she said. Please don't do it again, and try to understand that I'm not trying to be controlling or mean. I'm just trying to protect you. What if he would have been out there? He could have been. He would have seen you, the young man said. I'm sorry, she said. Please, try not to be so careless. Believe it or not, I do care. And I don't want anything to happen to you, the young man said. Then he sighed as he left the room. She could see that the young man was upset, and she wasn't sure whether she should try to speak to him or just let him be. It seemed obvious that he didn't want to be bothered at the moment, even though she didn't want to leave things as they were. She then decided that it was probably best to give him space and time to cool down. She decided to go into the other bedroom. When she entered the room, she closed the door behind her, and then she walked over to the bed and sat down. As she sat there, she thought to herself and wondered if the nightmare would come to an end and if her life would ever be normal. Then she thought about her brother and how much she missed him. She also remembered that she had called him before she had gotten caught by her worst nightmare. By that time, he was probably worried about her. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she needed to contact him. She got up from where she was sitting, and she left the room to find a telephone, since there didn't seem to be one in the bedroom. She searched the entire place, but she didn't see a phone anywhere. The only place she didn't check was the room where the young man was. She wasn't sure whether it was a good idea to bother him, since he seemed to be upset, even though she wanted to contact her brother. She sighed nervously before she decided to see if there was a phone in the room. She made her way to the room. The door was open, so she looked inside. There was no phone in the room, and the young man was on the bed. He had fallen asleep. She was about to walk away, but then she glanced at the young man. She was hesitant for a moment, but then she decided to go into the room. When she approached the bed, she stood there for a moment as she kept her eyes on the young man. Suddenly, she felt butterflies in her stomach. She became nervous as she looked at him, and then she took a deep breath before she released it slowly. She was about to leave the room, but then she stopped herself. She gently touched the young man's face, and then she kissed him. Fearing that he would wake up, she left the room, and then she went back into the other bedroom and closed the door behind her. "I can't believe I did that," she thought to herself. She walked over to the bed and sat down. At that moment, she was afraid to leave the room, and she wasn't sure if she would be able to face the young man because of what she had done. A few hours had passed, and she was still not ready to leave the room. Everything remained quiet, so she figured that the young man was still asleep. Then suddenly, there was a knock on the bedroom door, and she became apprehensive and said nothing. "Hey, are you all right?" the young man asked. She didn't respond. Then things became quiet again. She sighed before she laid down on the bed. She didn't notice that the young man had opened the door and stepped into the room. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them back up, she found him standing right at the bedside. "Oh, I didn't hear you come in," she said. "I apologize. I wasn't meaning to intrude or be rude. You didn't answer when I knocked and asked you if you were all right, so I decided to see if you were okay," the young man said. "Yes, I'm fine," she said. "Are you sure?" the young man asked. She just nodded. The young man sighed, and then he was about to leave the room, but then he stopped, and then he turned and looked at her. "There's something that I need to say to you," the young man said. At that moment, tension rose inside her because she thought for sure that he was about to confront her about the kiss. "I want to apologize to you for the way I acted earlier," the young man said. "It's not necessary," she said. "Yes, it is. I'm sorry," the young man said. "It's fine. All is forgiven," she said. The young man was about to leave the room. She let out a sigh of relief because she thought for sure that he would confront her about what she did, but he didn't. When he approached the doorway, he stopped, and then he looked at her for a moment. He was about to leave the room, but then he turned around and made his way back to the bed. The two of them looked at one another nervously. "Is everything all right?" she asked. The young man didn't respond. He stood there quietly for a moment as he kept his eyes on her, and then he sat down on the bed beside her. "Look, I think there's something that we need to talk about, and I have a feeling that you know what it's about," the young man said. "Yes, I think so," she said. "I know what you did. The thing is, we've already been through this. I already told you that it's not a good idea," the young man said. "What if I don't see it the way you see it?" she said. "Listen to me. I'm not a good person. I don't deserve to be loved," the young man said. "You can't be that bad. You're helping me," she said. "You don't understand," the young man said. His eyes filled with tears as he looked into her eyes. "I keep trying to fix things, but I just can't. I can never fix what I messed up," the young man said. "What happened?" she asked. "I can't talk about it," the young man said. "Whatever it is, we can figure it out," she said. "No, we can't, and I don't think that you should get attached to me, but unfortunately, I know that you have," the young man said. "What about you?" she asked. The young man didn't respond. "I get the impression that you want to punish yourself," she said. You don't want to get mixed up with me. I'm a broken human being, and it would probably be a life of misery for you, the young man said. No, to be without you would be misery, she said. Then she took hold of his hand as she looked into his eyes. Whatever it is that you are dealing with, you don't have to face it alone. We can face it together, she said. At that moment, the young man broke down and cried, and she hugged him tightly. I don't know why you insist on being with me. He'll either destroy you or make you miserable, the young man said. Then maybe it's time for you to break all ties with him, she said. It's not that easy. He's relentless and he won't stop. I don't know what's wrong with him or why he's doing the things he's doing. Perhaps it was all the things that happened in the past. I don't know, but most of my life has been miserable, the young man said. It's all the more reason to get away from him, she said. No, it's all the more reason to stop him. I don't want him to torment anyone else. Even before I messed up, he treated me badly. He'd blame me for everything, even if it wasn't my fault. He also used to lock me in my room, and he isolated me from the rest of the family. I lived the life of a prisoner, and I don't understand why. So many times, I asked what I had done wrong, but he never had an answer, the young man said. I'm sorry, she said. I don't want you to live the kind of life that I've lived. What if I end up like him? The young man said. I don't think that you will. It seems to me like you want to fix your mistakes, while he just wants to make things worse, she said. But I can't fix it, no matter how badly I want to, but I can stop him, the young man said. I don't want you to do it alone. He's dangerous, she said. Which is why I don't want you near him. I fear that he might kill you, the young man said. But he might kill you, she said. The young man sighed. If only we could find the evidence that could put him away, she said. I'm working on it, but for now my main focus is protecting you, the young man said. When and if this nightmare ever ends, I'd really like for you to stay with me. It could be a new beginning for both of us. I realize that at the moment you don't want to get involved with anyone, but I hope that you could at least think about it. Don't ever ask me to just forget about you, because I won't. I can't, nor do I want to. And I'm hoping that I won't have to go on with the rest of my life missing you, because I will, she said. I won't forget you either. It is too bad that we couldn't have met under better circumstances, though I'm not sure whether it would change my current feelings, the young man said. What exactly are your feelings? She asked. I think you know where I stand. I've made it clear, the young man said. Yes, you push me away because of the situation that we're in, and because you want to punish yourself. What are your true feelings? She said. The young man said nothing as he looked into her eyes. Why can't you answer me? She asked. I think it's too soon, the young man said. Do you? Or are you trying to run from how you truly feel? She asked. I'm not ready for this, the young man said. Can you look me in the eyes and tell me that? She asked. He said nothing as he looked away. You don't have to keep doing this. You don't have to keep torturing yourself. You don't have to be alone and miserable, she said. It's what I deserve, the young man said. No, you are a good person. I can tell, she said. No, I'm not, the young man said. He then got up and he looked at her with a sorrowful expression on his face. He was about to walk away when she got up and took hold of his hand. No, I'm not going to just let you walk away, she said. The young man said nothing to her as they looked into each other's eyes. Then she closed her eyes and kissed him. I'm sorry. I can't do this. I just can't, the young man said. Then he turned and walked away. The young man kept to himself for most of the day. The only time she saw him was briefly when they had a bite or two to eat. He remained silent the entire time, and then he would go back to the room where he had been staying. As for her, she regretted everything that happened that day, and she went to the room where she was staying. It was obvious that he was pushing her away, and as much as she hated it, she realized that it was best to try to move on, even though she knew that she would never be able to forget him. She wished more than ever that she could contact her brother because she just wanted the entire nightmare to end. She sighed as she laid down on the bed. She closed her eyes, and it wasn't long after that when the bedroom door opened. The young man quietly made his way into the room, and he walked over to the bed. When he approached it, he looked at her for a moment. His heart raced, and he trembled as he kept his eyes on her. Then he closed his eyes as he gave her a kiss. Tension rose inside of him when he opened his eyes and noticed she was looking right at him. He was about to walk away when she took him by the hand. The young man sat down, and then the two of them looked at one another before they kissed. Then they hugged each other tightly. Then the young man was about to get up. "Please, stay with me," she said. The young man said nothing to her as he looked into her eyes for a moment, and then he laid down beside her. She was glad that he came into the room, even though she could see that he was still tense. She smiled as she looked into his eyes as she gently touched the side of his face. She knew that she would never be able to forget him as her feelings for him continued to grow. She hoped that she would never have to move on because she knew, without a doubt, that she wanted him to be a part of her life. The next morning, when they woke up, the young man was about to leave the room when she took hold of his hand. "Please don't go," she said. The young man looked at her for a moment before he laid back down. "There's something that I need to say," he said. "What is it?" she asked. "I want to apologize for intruding. I didn't want to leave things as they were," the young man said. She said nothing as she looked into his eyes. "Perhaps I should go," the young man said. He was about to get up when she took hold of his hand again. "Please don't," she said. The young man looked at her nervously. "You don't need to do this. You don't have to push me away," she said. The young man sighed, and then he rested against her. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that your father hurt you in the past, but that doesn't mean that you have to push everyone away who care about you," she said. "I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to have to live the kind of life that I've lived," the young man said. "It doesn't have to stay that way, nor do you have to be alone," she said. "I've been alone for most of my life," the young man said. "I know, you told me," she said. "For most of my life, I've lived the life of a prisoner, isolated from everyone else," the young man said. "It's sad," she said. "It's true," the young man said. "Why would he do that to you?" she asked. "I don't know," the young man said. "That's terrible," she said. "As I told you, he used to blame me for everything that went wrong. It didn't matter what it was. He always twisted it to somehow make it seem like it was my fault," the young man said. "I really think that you need to get away from him," she said. "It's not that simple. He's a very controlling and manipulative man," the young man said. "You're away from him now," she said. The young man didn't speak. "Don't go back to him. Now that you're away from him, start a new life for yourself. It sounds like the situation that you were in was extremely toxic and damaging. You don't need that," she said. "I'll still have to stop him," the young man said. "Why does it have to be you? It sounds like you've been through enough," she said. "It's just something that I have to do," the young man said. "If that's how you feel, but I think that you should break away from that horrible situation and start your own life. You deserve better than how he's been treating you, she said. I don't, the young man said. That's what he made you believe. He deserves to go to prison for what he did, she said. Then she hugged him tightly as she continued to speak to him. I still think that when this is over, you should stay with me. I don't care if we have to relocate as long as we're together. You'll never have to be lonely again. We can begin a new life together. As time went on, she and the young man grew closer. With the time that passed, he pushed her away less and less, and he became more comfortable with her. She was happier because he was no longer pushing her away. She knew that she would have to be patient with him, but it was worth it to her, and she hoped that things would work out, and they would end up spending their lives together. She knew that he was the one who she would want to spend her life with, and she hoped that would never change. She also hoped that he would feel the same way. It was early one morning, and the young man stepped out of the room for a moment, and she waited patiently for him to come back. Suddenly, the door opened and someone entered the room, but it wasn't the young man. She trembled as she looked at her worst nightmare who stood before her. I thought I told you not to move, the man said. No, please go away, she said. No, not until I've finished what I started, the man said. No, please don't, she said. There's nothing you can do. We're out here all alone, and there's no one here to stop me, the man said. Suddenly, the young man stepped into the room. That's where you're wrong, the young man said. The man suddenly seemed surprised and angry, and he turned and looked at the young man. I'm here, and I will stop you, the young man said. You, the man said. You will not hurt her. Let her go, the young man said. What are you going to do about it? The man said. The young man didn't respond. Look at you trying to be the hero. You put on this act like you're so innocent, but she doesn't know everything now, does she? The man said. The young man didn't respond. Does she? The man said. Father, I'm asking you to stop this, the young man said. Why? The man said. Because this isn't solving anything, the young man said. I think you should stay out of my way and let me do what I came here to do, the man said. What did you come here to do? The young man asked. The man didn't respond. The young man acted quickly and shoved his father, knocking him down to the floor. Then he rushed over to her, took her hand, and the two of them rushed out of the room. Then the two of them stopped, and the young man looked her in the eyes as he spoke to her. I want you to take the keys and get out of here. Don't look back, the young man said. He then gave her the keys. No, she said. You have to go, the young man said. What about you? She asked. The young man said nothing. No, I'm not leaving without you, she said. You must go. It's the only way. This is your chance to be free. This time, do as I say. Leave this place and don't look back. Never once think about coming back for me, the young man said. I don't want to leave without you, she said. It has to be this way, the young man said. But he might kill you, she said. If you don't leave, then he will kill you, and I don't want that to happen. Now please go, the young man said. She turned, and she was about to leave, but then she stopped for a moment. She turned and looked at him with tear-filled eyes, and then she gave him a kiss goodbye. She rushed outside while the young man went back into the room where his father was. His heart sank when he noticed that he was no longer there, and the window was open. "No," the young man said. He rushed outside, where he found both of them. "Father, let her go," the young man said. "No," the man said. "Please don't do this. Take me instead. Do what you will with me, but don't do anything to her. She did nothing to you," the young man said. "No," she said. "It's me that you want." "Is it not?" the young man said. "I want to finish what I started," the man said. "Leave her out of it. She did nothing to you. Please, let her go," the young man said. The man reluctantly let her go before he started to walk toward the young man. "If I didn't know any better, I would think that you have feelings for her," the man said. The young man said nothing. "Do you think you deserve her? Do you think that you deserve any kind of happiness?" the man asked. The young man didn't respond. "Did you think that you would get off that easily?" the man asked. The young man fought back tears as he remained silent. "You can masquerade as a hero all you want, son, but it changes nothing. Nothing that you'll ever do will ever undo the mess that you made. I promise that I will make you pay for what you did. I'm going to make you regret the day you were born," the man said. "I already do," the young man said. With an expression of anger on her face, she took a few steps toward the man. "Leave him alone," she said. "I suggest you stay out of this," the man said. "Please go," the young man said. "I'm not leaving without you," she said. The man glanced at her from the corner of his eye, and then he knocked his son down. "Stop it," she said. She shoved the man, and then she rushed over to the young man. "Are you all right?" she asked. Just then the man took hold of her. "You should have left while you had the chance," the man said. Then he stabbed her, and she fell down to the ground. "No," the young man said. The man looked at his son angrily as he spoke. "Do you see what you caused? This is all your fault," the man said. The young man's eyes filled with tears as he looked at her. He tried to rush over to her, but the man took hold of him. "Don't listen to him. It's not your fault. He's a monster," she said. "Oh, but it is his fault. It's all his fault. All he had to do was stay out of it and mind his own business, but he couldn't even do that," the man said. Then he looked at his son angrily. "Isn't that right, son? You can't do anything right," the man said. "Stop it! Stop yelling at him," she said. The young man broke free from his father, and then he tried to make his way over to her, but then his father took hold of him and slammed him into a tree. "What do you think you're doing, little man?" the man asked. "She needs help," the young man said. "No, I have you both right where I want you. I just killed 2 birds with 1 stone. I finished what I started, and in the process, I hit you where it hurt, which is most delightful because I want you to suffer tremendously. As for you, I'd suggest you keep your mouth shut if you know what's good for you, or else you'll be next," the man said. "Is that a threat, father?" the young man asked. "What do you think?" the man said. "Go ahead. I'd be better off," the young man said. His father scoffed. "No, death would be too good for you. You're not getting off that easily. I'd rather make you suffer, and that's what I plan to do, and I will enjoy every minute of it," the man said. "No," she said. The man ignored her as he took his son away. "What about her? You can't just leave her like that. She needs help," the young man said. The man didn't respond, and it was obvious that he did not care. The young man started to cry as he was taken further away from her. "No, no, you can't do this. You can't leave her like that. She'll die," the young man said. The man didn't respond, even as his son tried to break free from him. "Please stop," the young man said. The man didn't respond as he continued to take his son away. Then the young man broke free from his father, and he shoved him, knocking him down before he tried to get to her. But it was no use. The man got back up and knocked his son out, and then he took him away. After that, he returned to his victim, who was unresponsive at that time. He glanced around until he spotted an old hollow tree. The man took his victim and hid her in the tree. Then he glanced around one last time before he started to walk away, and he did not look back as he left his victim behind.